Okay, good. We all settled in? Can you all hear me okay? Okay, good. Who here has seen me before? Okay, good. Not too many. The reason is, if you haven't seen me before, I can tell the same jokes. Okay, so the topic today is the end of karma, and I have about 4 or 5 talks on karma, and maybe next year we do all of them. And this particular aspect, actually I've always found in Singapore that when the groups ask me for topics, they always like topics on karma. And I'm not sure why you're so obsessed with your karma. Is that because you have good karma or bad karma? I'm not so sure. So it seems to be something that interests people, this working of karma. But today I don't really want to talk too much about how karma works itself. The main idea behind karma is when you do something, it's going to come back and get you, is the main idea. And it is part of right view in Buddhism that we accept that there is karma. So the actions that we make will have an effect on the future. I won't, this is the topic of a different talk, but I might mention it. The Buddha didn't say that what happens to you now is dependent on what you did in the past. What he said is what you do now will affect your future, and that's not the same thing. So people often get mixed up with this. If the things that happen to you now depend on what you have done in the past, then there's very little room for free will. But if what you do now affects your future, then everything is down to free will. So these are two very, very different philosophies, free will and determinism. And so the teaching in Buddhism is what you do now affects the future. That means your will, your decisions, your actions, how you decide to steer your ship is extremely important. But if everything depends on what you did in the past, well, even your decisions now depend upon your things that you did in the past. So there's very little room for free will. You are not really in control of your ship to steer it. Now, between these philosophies, there are different opinions. I have mine. My one is the right one, of course. It's like right view, right? Samma ditti, right view. Right view is everyone who agrees with me. And thank you. So there are different views on this topic. And so one, as an academic, if we approach Buddhism with an academic frame of mind, what we are interested in what are the views, what are the interpretations. If you're approaching it from a religious standpoint, you say, well, my teacher says this, and this is how it is. And I don't recommend that you take that stance. An academic stance is much more useful and much more open, and you can find out what do different people think, how do they describe this mechanism. My own teacher actually was much more on the deterministic side, and he said there's very, very little free will. And I said, ask him some questions, and I said, yes, but the Buddha said what you do now determines your future. And his answer was, well, stop asking me questions then. So he has his view, and I have my view, I guess. So let's bring up an example. And this example is from many years ago, and I was working for my father. and I had a car, and it was a blue Mini Metro, which in those days was a very common car and a very common colour. And so I drove to work, and I parked my car up, but I was having problems all the way there because my car was so filthy that I couldn't see out of the back window. Now, I was only like 18 at the time, and somebody had written with their finger in the back window of my car, "Don't wash me, plant something." So I thought, it's probably about time that I washed at least the back window, forget the rest of it, but I washed the back window of my car. So I had a 20-minute break during the morning, and I prepared everything. I got a nice bucket of hot soapy water, I got a bucket of cold water, and I got a sponge. And when my break time came up, straight out the back door, I marched right across the car park. It's quite far away, so I didn't have much time. So I got there quickly, and I washed my car quickly. You'd be amazed at how quickly you can wash a car. And then I stood back, and I still had about 30 seconds left to admire my achievement. And so I stood back. Now, my car had been in a crash. Okay, I crashed my car sometime before that. So as I stood back and admired my good work, I realized that after I'd gotten the car back from the repair shop, they'd put different wheels on it. I thought, hey, they've changed my wheels into pretty nice wheels. I'm like, that's good. I didn't notice that. And then I looked through the back window to check that I could see through, and it was just so clean, and I could see through. And as I looked through, I saw some toys on the back parcel shelf. I'm like, I don't remember those toys. And then it struck me, I'd washed somebody else's car. And you know how when you've done something stupid, you walk away really stiff, hoping nobody's going to notice you? Walking away. Now, I didn't have any time left, but I always regret not waiting to see the reaction on the face of the person who owns the car. What are they going to think? They've just gone to buy a loaf of bread and a newspaper, and they come back and their car has been washed. The only car in 200 cars in the car park, the only car that has been washed is their one. What are they going to think? So, is this karma? Does that person come back and see their car and like, well, I must have done a good deed in a past life, and now it's come back to me and my car has been washed? Is it my bad karma? Have I done something wrong before? Like I said I'd do something for somebody and I didn't do it, and now in this new lifetime that person has parked their car in the car park, so karma has made me go and wash their car for them? If you start to think like this, you'll go nuts. If we try and determine what's happened to us and try to explain by karma in this way, it's never really going to work. It's always going to be a case of speculation, right? You don't know unless you have very supernormal powers. You don't know why did you wash that car. They don't know why their car got washed. There was a sutta where the Buddha said there are three kinds of wrong view about why things happen in the universe. The first wrong view is everything happens due to chance. He said that isn't correct. Everything happens due to God. That also is not correct. And everything happens due to karma also is not correct. So these three were specifically stated to not be correct. Notice that if you've ever done logic, Aristotelian categorical logic, you'll know that to say that everything happens due to chance is not correct. Leaves the door open. Some things happen due to chance is possible. Everything happens due to God is not correct. Some things happen due to God or a supernatural force, may be correct. It's not stated in this teaching. And some things happen due to karma. From other suttas, we know that to be correct, according to Buddhist teaching. So this working of karma is something that people are very interested in, and usually people are afraid of their bad karma and their bad karma coming up and catching up with them. So one of the things that people do is various ceremonies to try and lessen or remove some of their bad karma. And for example, there was one man who I met in the monastery, and he came to ordain as a monk. And I was chatting with him, and I started to get his story. And it turns out he'd had a section of his intestines removed, which seems to be quite a common thing in Thailand. I'd never heard of it in England before, but in Thailand it seems to be an operation that happens. I think it's because they eat too much white rice, but that's my... I'm not a fan of white rice, you see. In fact, when I was 6 years old, my brother told me that white rice was boiled maggots. So ever since then, I've not been a fan of white rice. So he'd had this operation, and he came to the temple, and he told me about having the operation. And he came to the temple because he wanted to clean up his bad karma that had caused the illness. Now, the Buddha was quite specific with illness. He said some illnesses are caused by the weather, some illnesses are caused by the winds or the humours in the body, some illnesses are caused by chance, some illnesses are caused by karma. We don't know. You don't know what the cause was. My advice to him was, if you've had an operation on your intestines, don't come and stay in the monastery. He was from a well-off family. I said, you should go and rent a nice hut or chalet on the beach in Hua Hin and rest up and take it easy. Living in a monastery isn't that easy. You've got to get up very early, you've got to sleep on the cold, hard floor, and you're going to eat a lot of bad food, right? A lot of white rice. And people in Thailand, they bring the kind of food that they think is like a higher class food, because if you're going to make merit, you want to make merit with better food. But that always means like the oily, rich, sweet, salty, deep-fried kinds of food. You'll never see a vegetable, right? And so the food often is not good food in the monasteries. And this is something of a problem, in fact. And every so often there's a campaign, like half-hearted campaign, but to try and educate people to bring more healthy food into the monasteries. The monks, strangely, they don't get it, and they're so used to having this rich, oily, deep-fried kind of food that you bring them vegetables and they don't eat it. So it is something of an issue in Thailand. So my advice to him was, don't come and stay in a temple. You've had a fairly serious operation. Don't put yourself through the hardship of, sleeping in a difficult situation, no air conditioning, and there's food that you don't want to eat. You can only eat at certain times of the day. But it turned out that he really enjoyed his stay. He really felt spiritually uplifted by his time as a monk, and instead of staying for 4 weeks, he stayed for about 6 months. And so my advice was completely wrong. And some things I'm very good at. Giving advice is not one of them. In fact, my best piece of advice is go and ask an expert, So this question of cleaning up your bad karma is something that people seem to be very interested in. And often in Thailand, around the Mochit area, we see signs of the Christian groups, the fundamental Christian groups. And they hold up signs that say, if you're a Buddhist, your bad karma is going to get you. But if you're a Christian, Jesus will wipe away your sins. And this is quite attractive, right? People feel if I join this group, my bad karma is removed. It's kind of ironic because they would have to accept the Buddhist teachings of karma in order to compete against it, but actually the church doesn't accept it, so kind of ironic. So the question is that does your bad karma, the things that you've done in the past, when they catch up with you, can we remove the bad karma that we've done? Can you remove the good karma? Do you want to remove the good karma? There's when we talk about karma, God, or chance, these three theories that I just mentioned were considered to be wrong view, if you hold to them as the only theory. Why do we like these ideas of kind of God controlling things, or one of the kind of New Age philosophies you hear very often is everything happens for a reason? I always answer, yeah, but it might not be a very good reason. But if you hold that view, everything happens for a reason, it's a way to try and make sense of it, right? And when you can make sense of a world that doesn't make very much sense, you feel more secure. And when things are happening that you can't understand, you feel very insecure. And there was one of my favorite psychologists, his name was George Kelly, and his main theory is called the personal construct theory. And he was doing Freudian analysis during Depression era America in Kansas, I think it was. And the people that were coming to them were mostly blacks, and they were having a hard time because the economy was collapsing. People didn't know about boom and bust cycles in those days. So in the Great Depression, the Depression era America, everything was collapsing, and people thought that was the trajectory and everybody was going to die. That was how it looked. A sensible person would hold that view. Agriculture had collapsed, the economy had collapsed, shipping had collapsed, everybody was out of work, all the banks were foreclosing on things. And this was the problem that these people had, and they were coming to him and he was analyzing their dreams. Is that good psychotherapy? Like, you don't need to analyze their dreams to know what their problem is. And so this struck George Kelly as something very interesting. And what he noted was that when they came to him with their problems, and he did the psychoanalysis on them, analyzing their dreams and their relationships with their parents and Freudian slips and free association, this kind of thing, he found that they would go away helped. They would be happier and better off for having come to see this therapist. But he also realized that his therapy was nonsense. Dream analysis on these people was just nuts. So what he figured out was the thing that's helping them is not the psychoanalysis, but having a different way to frame or understand the world around them, the things that are happening. And by talking to the psychologist, they get a different way to understand the world that they couldn't understand. I mean, it was outside of most people's understanding to see the collapse of an economy like this. So people are then comforted when they have a new way of understanding or interpreting their experience. And he called this constructs. Now, some of you may have come across this term, constructs, or sometimes we say filters. And it's the way in which we understand the world around us. We see, the Buddha used this kind of thing. You remember the story of the woman whose husband and children had all been killed, and she's utterly distraught. She goes to the Buddha, and the Buddha tells her to take a mustard seed from every house that has not had somebody die, and she goes from house to house, realizes that every house has had people who have died, and then she's no longer distraught. She can come do the practice, and everything's okay. So what the Buddha had done in that story is he changed her constructs. He'd changed the filters through which she is understanding the world around her. And if we have better filters for our understanding, we feel happier. So this is what I think is happening when people over-subscribe to the theory of karma, try to say, well, everything that's happening to me is due to karma. It's not. Things happen to you that are not due to karma. Things happen to you due to blind chance, as often as not. That woman, it's just sheer chance that her blue mini metro got washed that day when she went to buy a loaf of bread. That's just sheer chance. So the idea that everything happens for a reason, this also is a very common theory that's out there in the current time. And it's not a bad construct. I don't believe that everything happens for a reason. I think, or if it does, it might not be a good reason. Donald Trump gets elected. It's happened for a reason. It's not a good reason. But that's our effort to try and make sense of the world around us. And really, the world doesn't make sense. We are confused. We don't really know about life and death. We don't really understand what consciousness is. We don't understand what memory is. We don't understand why people do things that they do. Why people vote for Donald Trump. Why people accept a military dictatorship in Thailand. Why people buy iPhones. I mean, I can't understand it. I don't like iPhones. I don't like iPhone users. So, this is why we we subscribe to this idea of karma, like, well, everything's happened due to something that happened in the past. It's a way to comfort yourself, to make you feel more comfortable that there is some kind of order and system, where really we don't understand the world around us. We don't understand what's happening. And it's when we don't understand it, this is what George Kelly called getting caught with your constructs down. And he means that when you can't understand it, you feel uncomfortable. When you have a way to interpret your experience, you feel more comfortable. So, the workings of karma, of how it actually works then, are the topic of another day. But the main idea is things that you do. I like to think of it as habits that you create. These will have an effect on you in the future. So, for example, if you work as a salesman and you lie to people all the time and you try to get them to buy things that they don't want, and you say, yes, this car has only had one owner before it and done 50,000 miles, but really you've turned the clock back. And if you live in an unwholesome, unmeritorious manner, this will have a knock-on into your future. You will be more suspicious of other people lying to you because you're doing it in your daily life. For example, if you spend your time doing more wholesome activities, or once a week you volunteer somewhere, or you're very careful to look after your parents or your neighbors or something like that, this will create a different kind of personality that you will then have in the future. And I noticed this with when I was doing my psychology degree. One of the things we had to do was go and do some kind of engagement now with society. Now, I was interested in psychology because I love the theories, but when it comes to actually talking to people, I'm not so good. And I didn't want to be a counselor. I was interested in research psychology, not counseling. And so I chose, some people went to the hospital, some people went to different things. I chose to go to the old people's home in large part because it was very close to my temple and didn't involve much traveling. And so old people's homes in Thailand are relatively rare. You're really supposed to look after yourself, or your family looks after you. The government or private organizations don't take on this job very much. So I went to this home, and I think there's about 300 residents there, and some of them were kind of paid and they had nicer apartments. Some of them were not paid and they kind of lived more communally. But it was quite a nice place. And the old people would make the fake flowers. I don't like to say fake flowers because they're really quite beautiful. You know, they're really well made. They're not just like plastic runs off a machine. They're really beautifully made, handmade kind of decorative flowers. And the lady that ran the centre was really quite young. She was mid-30s. And I thought that was interesting that somebody in their mid-30s would run this kind of home. She was a very capable woman, very sharp. And the question I asked her, because we all have to ask questions, right? So nobody else asked a question. I thought, I'll ask a question. And I said to her, what lesson have you learned running this old people's home? And she said something very interesting. She said, from the residents here, I can really see the way that they've lived their life. Because however it was that they lived their life, that characteristic becomes exaggerated when they get very old. So some people had spent their life, looking after their children and their grandchildren and looking after people. And now in that home, they found a role and a job by helping the other people, or helping the staff, or helping with the food, or helping with the activities. And they have a role and they have a function, and they actually live longer and healthier. And she said other people have lived their life expecting servants to run around for them and being looked after. And when they come into the old people's home, they still expect everybody to look after them, and they complain and bitch and moan and gripe. So I find that interesting. I think that's a good lesson for karma, is the way that you've lived your life habitually will have an effect on you in the future. According to Buddhism, this will carry on into your next lifetime. So if you're very cruel to animals, in your next lifetime you'll be very sickly. If you kill animals in your next lifetime, you'll have a short life. Here's an interesting one. If you are a good listener in this lifetime, in the next lifetime you'll be a good leader. I find that interesting. And so on and so forth. There was these correlations. But remember, it's not exactly cause and effect. It's just a generalized... There are other factors at play, including karma. So the question then comes of karma that you have created in the past. What about the bad karma that you've done? Is it going to catch up with you and punish you? And is there anything that you can do about it? So this idea dovetails quite nicely into what the Christian group was saying about how Christianity will wash away your past deeds. And actually the two theories, the two ideas work perfectly in tandem, of the karma and removing past karma. And the reason is the karma depends upon the content of the mind and the experience. But the whole point of enlightenment is it's not the content of your experience. It's not an experience that you can have. It's outside of the experiencing mind. And to get to enlightenment, the thing that we have to do is withdraw the mind from experience as it's bubbling up all of the time. Turn the attention around and see what was called the amata, the deathless. So this idea of enlightenment means that there is something like a core to your nature, which actually is perfectly pure and pristine. This is usually more emphasized in Mahayana Buddhism, but also comes from Theravada. Most of the Mahayana ideas actually come from the original ideas of the Buddha, which is the way it should be. There's very few Mahayana ideas which are new, that you didn't find in the original texts. Sometimes the emphasis gets shifted and something gets more important or less important, but the ideas are all there in the original. So this idea is that there is what the Buddha called the amata, deathless, part of your nature. Now, when I say it's part of your nature, you think of yourself and all your stuff, but somewhere in the middle is a little spark that's enlightenment. And that's the way it's very often described. But I want to think about it in a different way. I want to think of this nature, that is this original nature, is the big picture. And the little spark is you. And that little spark can go out, and the main nature is still there. We can call it amata or deathless. Deathless means it's something that doesn't arise and cease, doesn't change. Okay? Now, if you think about any experience that you've ever had, the most blissful experience that you've ever had, for me it was the day I first tried Marmite. That experience came up, right, and disappeared. You think about the worst day you've ever had, the day you ran out of Marmite. That experience, whatever your worst experience is, that experience came up and it died out. So experience is continually arising. It's something like a fountain. And this is the teaching on dependent origination that I'm talking about, but I'm not going to go into details. And it's something like, if you picture a fountain, it's a fountain of consciousness flowing up, flowing out, and creating experiences. And right now you're looking at me, and that's your experience. The next second, somebody behind you coughs, and you're like, shh. What happened to me in that second? I've disappeared from your experience, and your experience is centered on that person behind you. Then there's a car crash outside. Then immediately your experience goes to the outside. I've always noticed that people come for Dhamma talks and they'll pay attention to absolutely anything except the person who's doing a Dhamma talk. The slightest little disturbance and everybody's like, oh, what's that? There's one time I was doing the Dhamma talk on the beach and I noticed that there's a small meditation retreat. There's about 7 or 8 people. And I could see them all kind of like this. So I ignored it and I carried on talking. I have to be a bit more inspiring. I tried my best to get their attention and I couldn't do it. And eventually I was like, oh, you lot are the worst people I've ever met. You can't pay attention on anything. And they said, no, Venerable, there's a big snake right behind you. So I can forgive them for paying more attention to the snake. I think they could have told me, but... So experience is something that continually arises like a fountain, and it gets moved around and directed. And your experience goes here, it goes there, it goes on to something else. And when you first start meditating, what do you find when you first started meditating? The mind is jumping around, right? Not now that you're all experts. The mind is jumping around. And people don't like that. They say, well, I can't do meditation because my mind jumps around. Missing the fact that you've just started to get a fundamental insight into the nature of your own mind. It doesn't stop still and it moves according to its own power. And most people are so caught up in where their experience is getting based, what they're looking at, tasting, smelling, touching, that they don't notice that this isn't me. this feels like it's me. I'm going here, I'm eating this, I'm choosing what I want to eat off the menu and all of this kind of thing. But when you meditate, you realize the mind just runs by a power of its own. And it jumps from this to this to this. You may have heard this term monkey mind, right? But when you go back to the original sutta, the monkey mind didn't mean that your mind is all scattered around and not concentrated in meditation. Doesn't mean that you've had too much to do and now you come and sit down and your mind's still jumping around. The monkey mind meant that this is the nature of consciousness all the time, regardless of who you are, what you are doing. The mind, in the sutta, it said it's like a monkey swinging through the trees. In fact, I'll give you the full context. This was the teaching on impermanence. And the Buddha said, it's easy if I say to you that impermanence is true, because you can see the body will live for 50 years, 80 years, 100 years. It will change, it will grow old, the teeth turn yellow, the back becomes crooked as a roof rafter. I love this kind of description. The skin becomes wrinkled, so it's easy for you to see that the body is impermanent. But it's hard for you to see that the mind is impermanent. But in truth, it arises up as one thing and ceases as another, just like a monkey swinging through the forest will grab hold of one branch, let go to grab hold of another branch, to grab hold of another branch. So this is the actual nature of the mind, but it's harder to see than the impermanence of the body. So when we talk about impermanence, we don't mean that you build a building, it's going to fall down. You plant a tree, it's going to grow old and die. What we mean by impermanence is experience itself never stops changing. Okay? So this is quite important because people are always like, everything's impermanent. And like, if anybody says that to me ever again, this one time I was at a funeral and it was a friend of mine who'd passed away, and I was really kind of a bit upset, and the family were there, and so as we were doing the funeral, I got a bit teary-eyed, and then the family came to me and said, "Oh, don't worry, Venerable, everything's impermanent." I'm like, I'm supposed to be telling you that. So yeah, we know everything's impermanent logically in the world. That's not what the teaching about. It's about experience. Every second, every time you redirect your consciousness, you have this new experience coming up like a fountain. So what is the amata, the deathless? Also, it's called the asankata dhamma, the unconditioned. It's also sometimes called jeda vimutti, liberation of the heart. Sometimes it's called Buddha nature. And other mystic traditions also have other names for it. What it means is there is this core experience or consciousness or mind. In Zen they have this idea of the original mind or the one mind. And everything that you experience, that's just the regular mind. But the idea is to get the attention back to the original mind. Something like analogy that was given by Ramana Maharshi that I always really like. He was a Hindu saint, sage. Not really Hindu, he's just enlightened being. And he said it's like a cinema projector. But we might say something like a torch. The torch can turn around and shine on many, many different things. And every place that the torchlight shines, that's your experience, the thing that you can see in the beam of light. But you miss the fact that within every single thing that you can see, there is that beam of light. The light source itself hasn't changed. It's still the same torch. And in the same way with the mind, everything that we know is an experience that is fountaining up, blowing up out of this like a fountain into our experience, into our conscious attention. But behind all of that is this original mind. And it's getting the attention back to that original mind that is enlightenment. The Buddha called it amata. This means deathless, something that does not arise, does not change, and does not cease. So just like the theory of Buddha nature, this means that it is already existing. It's pre-existing. Right? Like I say, people think of it as, well, this is my nature, but actually you're the aberration. That's the big picture. So if that's true, this means that to get to enlightenment, we don't have to change the content of the experience. Enlightenment isn't another experience that we generate. And this is quite important as a philosophical concept to get the idea into the mind. Because our job is to withdraw from the attachment of experience and turn the attention round back onto the source, back onto the mind itself. That is the process that we're doing in meditation. Meditation and general mindfulness practice. This is why attachment causes suffering. Doesn't mean you're attached to your children, your job, your house, paying your taxes, right? You have to do all of those things. To say that those attachments cause suffering is, well, it's nonsense, really. Your children, sure, they cause you suffering, but they bring you great joy too, so I'm told. I mean, I've never, I'll believe you. I'll take it on trust. Not for me, but. So attachment in regular world, you have to be attached to things. You have to pay your health insurance and, you have to get your kids off to school. You can't say, hey, I've become a Buddhist now. You don't have to go to school. I'm not attached, man. Then you're going to get arrested sooner or later. So attachment causes suffering. If you understand that way, it's nonsense. But when we understand in the clear terms of enlightenment, then it makes sense. Because what happens is the mind is continually flowing out into experience. And when we say flowing out, this includes into thinking. This is why the mind is considered a sense in Buddhism, just like the hearing sense, the smelling sense, the seeing sense. You also have the mind sense. You can sense your thoughts. Otherwise, when you do your meditation and thoughts come up, you wouldn't know that they'd come up, right? But you can sense them come up. So this is also, the content of the mind is also considered external in Buddhism. So it's something like you have a citta, citta being the heart or the consciousness, and you have aramana, and the aramana is the object of consciousness. So it's like you have a torch, and you have the thing that the torch is shining onto. And as human beings, what's happened, or as animals, what's happened is we're only aware of the aramana, the object. We're not aware of that which is perceiving the object. So our job is to break the attachment of the mind continually flowing outwards. And what happens then? You turn the attention back in on yourself. Right? As an experience, what starts to happen is when you, because we are so continually caught up with things that this is a very difficult habit to break. And it will only happen once in a while. But once in a while, you'll be doing a meditation and suddenly everything will become easy. Your attention will become very clear. You may still have thoughts going on, sounds, sights, but suddenly you've hit like a stable ground. If from that point on you continue with the withdrawing of the mind, turning around and focusing on the mind itself, what happens is everything collapses. This whole world, this whole creation, this whole samsara that are our constructs that we make in order to understand the complicated world just comes crashing down. And the Buddha described this quite nicely. He said, if you think that the world is, how did he phrase it? If you have seen the arising of the world, you cannot say it's not real. If you have seen the cessation of the world, you cannot say it is real. Clear? So there's this question, well, is the whole world Maya? Is it just an illusion? No, it's not an illusion. The world is real. But because you see the world arising in your experience, you can say, yes, the world is a real thing. We're not denying that the world exists. But at the same time, you see the cessation of the world is when this whole process of experiencing and conscious attention going out, when that stops, and usually it's in meditation or close to meditation, suddenly everything collapses. This is the end of the world. In fact, I gave a talk on the end of the world for the youth group here about 7 or 8 years ago, and I was talking about this, and they were very unhappy with me because they wanted a prophecy for when the in 2020 on the Mayan calendar is the world going to end. That was what they were more interested in. So, if this is true, then if there is this enlightened nature, and this is what enlightened beings in every culture have been trying to impart and trying to teach to us, if this is actually true and real, what it means is, in order to get enlightened, in order to find this nature, we don't have to absolve all our karma. Karma is in the content of the experience, the things that come and go, arise and cease, pass and fade away. Yes, all of that happens according to a rule book, but it doesn't matter how much good that you would do or how saintly you could ever be, you would never clean up your karma enough to get you enlightened. The point is, the enlightenment is there the whole time, and it's yours for free. You don't have to go paying back large amounts of karma, large amounts of suffering in order to get to it. Okay? So in this sense, this is why I like to compare karma with forgiveness. In the Christian tradition, they tend to emphasize forgiveness. That means when you get to God, He doesn't really care about all the things that you've done in the past. This is the exact same concept that we have in Buddhism. Enlightenment is there, it's yours, it's real, it's not conditioned by anything, by your karma, by your past, by your thoughts. That's all the stuff you have to leave behind in order to get to this nature. So this is why I call it the end of karma. The Buddha never taught that in order to get enlightened, you need to clean up your karma. Now, there is a question of, as we get embarked in this process, then past bad karma can come and hinder you. Now, that can happen. And there's several stories, which I want to finish off with today, which encapsulate this idea. Now, I'll tell you the stories, but remember, stories are a way to make a set of constructs. They're a way, something that we can internalize in order to help interpret our experience of the world. So stories, we don't want to think of them as real. We want to think of them as giving us a real framework through which we can understand the world. So the story, several stories actually, of the prodigal son. Have you heard about the prodigal son? No? This is a very famous story. This is primarily a Christian story, but in actual fact, the story itself is far older than Christianity. And we find a version in Buddhism, we find several versions in Iran and the Near East. So this is a very, very old story that has gone through many cultures, okay, including Buddhism, including Christianity. So this story itself is much older than religion. And the story goes, there are several different versions of it. In one version, the prodigal son, prodigal means wasteful. So it's a father who has a wasteful son. So what he does is he goes to his son goes to the father and says, "Father, I want you to give me all my inheritance now." Okay? And after some negotiation, the father finally agrees and gives him the inheritance. And he goes off and he spends it and he buys beautiful clothes and food and enjoyment and pastimes, and he wastes and he fritters all the money away. Later he comes back, having learned his lesson, having learned that he'd lived his life in the wrong way. He comes back to the father and says, "Father, I did the wrong thing by taking my inheritance from you, and I've wasted it and made a mistake." And his father says, "Don't worry, you are my son and you are welcome back in the house." And then the other son says, "Hang on a minute. You gave him half the family fortune and he went and blew it, and now you're welcoming him back and giving him a big banquet. I'm the good son, I got no banquet." So that son was not happy, and the father said, "Yes, but what is lost and regained is more pertinent to you than something that was never lost." And they gave the analogy of a penny lost. If you have 10 pennies and you lose one, you're unhappy. But if you find it, that one penny is worth more to you than the other 9 pennies. Right? So this was the story of the prodigal son. And I think that was the Bible version. But the older versions of the story vary. So in one version of the story, the father, the son is a prodigal son. He's wasteful. And he's got the father's credit card, and he's continually spending the money from the credit card, from the gold card, wastefully. And eventually the father has had enough, and he says to the son, "Right, you're now cut off. You get no more funds from me." And so the son has spent a lot of money. He owes a lot of money. So the creditors come along and say, "We want our money." And the son says, "See my dad." And the dad says, "I'm not paying it." So the creditors grab the son and they enslave him. And they put him to work so that he can work off his debt. And he has to work for 7 years to pay off his debt to the creditors. But what happens? After 3 days, he's like, "Oh, this work, it really sucks. I don't like it." And he goes back to the father and says, "Father, I can't do it. I'm not built for work. It's too hard for me, and I can't do it." And the father says, "Nonetheless, I'm not paying your debts." And the father leaves the son to work for 7 days. And after 7 days, the father comes back and says, "Okay, now I will pay your debts. You've learned your lesson." So the meaning of this story is that the father's fortune is the thing that's given to you. You don't deserve it in many ways, but this is the fortune that is given to you. So this is like our enlightened nature. It is yours and it's for free. It's not something that you've earned or that you deserved. It's there and it's yours because you are the son. Okay? But when you come to start to do the practice, when you're starting to come to get back to your inheritance, what you find is your past catches up with you. Now, in this story, the son had 7 years' worth of debt to pay off, 7 years of work, but he only had to work for 7 days. So the idea of the story is that you don't have to pay off all your past karma. When your karma hinders you in your practice and your meditation and your enlightenment, it's only going to hinder you for a short period of time before you're going to get back to your original nature. You might think of it, this whole thing with original nature, you know, in Mahayana they say, "Oh, you're already enlightened, don't worry." And you're like, that's like saying, and I thought of this especially for Singaporeans, that's like saying, "You don't need to go to work because I've set up a bank account for you and you've got $20 million. But I'm not telling you the number." And then you say, "Yeah, but I have to go to work and pay my bills." You don't have to pay your bills. You've got $20 million in the bank. Where is it? I'm not telling you. So this is like the kind of Mahayana idea. They say, oh, you're already enlightened. You're like, yeah, but where is it then? Give it... $20 million in my bank account is no good if I haven't got the number, the Swiss bank account number, right? So it's true, but not true. Or they say true but not real, real but not true. The other story of the prodigal son was he takes his inheritance and he goes away and he spends it and wastes it. And he falls into a really bad state. And finally he's working as a swineherd, which means looking after pigs. And he noticed that even the pigs didn't have to work for their food. He had to work for his food. He said, even the pigs are better off than I am. So he wanders around and finally he comes back to his father's kingdom, father's kind of place. But it's been so long since he was away, he didn't recognize his father or the land. And he gets a job within the father's holdings. And the father recognizes the son, but realizes the son does not recognize the father. So the father instructs his staff. He said, give this boy a job and keep him here. So the boy gets a job. Then he says to his staff, right, go and bring that boy to me. And the boy thinks, why does the Lord and the Master want to speak to me? And he gets so terrified, he falls down in a faint and loses consciousness. And then the father realizes, oh, I'd better take it easy and help him step by step. So after the boy gets out of the faint, he's given a job, he's given more money, he's given more privileges. And slowly, but slowly, the boy improves himself. And then, after a period of time, the father says, I'm your father, and in fact, all of this belongs to you. So again, the moral or the meaning of this story is that when we come, our inheritance is enlightenment. That is the actual nature, and it's outside of just experience. But because we got caught in ignorance, we can't see what's happening. So this is like the boy going back. He can't recognize that this actually is his real place and his real kingdom. So the father has to take him step by step. But he doesn't have to earn the entire kingdom. He doesn't have to work for generations or many, many years. It already all belongs to him. And the father only has to help him a little bit for a few days or a few weeks or a few months in order to bring him back into his rightful inheritance. So these stories are a way to interpret our experience. And the story exemplifies that enlightenment actually is your nature, and you don't have to fix all your bad karma or your good karma. And people are always interested in their bad karma. It's funny, isn't it? They're not interested so much in their good karma. You ever see this when people say it's not fair? You know, this bad thing happened to me. It's not fair. It shouldn't happen. It's not fair that that thing happened to me. Somebody stole my car. It's not fair. But what happens when something good happens to you? Like, it's not fair. I just find $1,000 on the floor. Oh, it's not fair. Why do I get that $1,000? I shouldn't have that. Oh, my body is healthy. I don't have to go to hospital. It's not fair. Other people are sick. Nobody. He's like, no, that's what I deserve. That's So, we don't have to. The point about the karma is, yes, that's the workings of the universe, but we don't have to worry about how karma works or the mechanisms of it. What we want to do is withdraw out of that system altogether, withdrawing the mind from the addiction to experiences. Eventually the mind turns around and sees its own self and its own nature. And that's a remembering. That's a remembering what is actually there. It's not something that you have to create or that you have to do. So there was a similar kind of Buddhist story about this, which I like very much. It's the man whose goat was stolen. We could probably change it. Let's update it. The man whose iPhone was stolen. And he goes off and he chases after the thief, and finally he catches the thief who'd stolen his iPhone. Now, if that thief is a rich and a powerful man, what do? You say, "Excuse me, sir, you seem to have made a mistake and have picked up my iPhone. May I have it back, please, sir?" But if that person who stole it is somebody smaller and weaker than you, what do? You give them a good beating and you take your phone back, right? This is the story that the Buddha gave. He said that if you are behaving in a good and an upright and a moral way, when your bad karma catches up with you, it won't have very much power over you. Just like if you'd stolen something and you're a rich man, when the original owner of the item catches you, he can't do anything to you. But if you behave in a bad or an immoral manner, right, when your bad karma catches up with you, it's going to devastate you and beat you up. So the point of how we're going to manage the karma is you make yourself into a good and upright person. And that means when your bad karma catches up with you, it's not going to cause you too much trouble. But if you're a bad or immoral or non-upstanding person, then you're going to be harmed by your bad karma. So that's the one thing that we should do. Not worry about what karma is what, where it's come from. Only if you are upstanding now, it's not going to have much power over you. Another analogy that was given is like a wet cloth that is rolled up. It takes a long time to dry out. But a wet cloth that is laid out in the sun will dry very quickly. And again, putting the cloth out in the sun is like being a good person and being open and clear and honest. But being wound up like a wet cloth is like being tight and lying and mischievous and devious. Well, then it's going to take a lot longer for the bad karma to come out. So I'm going to leave those thoughts with you. Remember the prodigal son. The best version of the story is where he has to work for 7 days to pay off a debt that was worth 7 years of work. And this is the same for us. Enlightenment is your nature, but you're going to have to go through some struggles, some trials, some tribulations in your practice before you become an arahant. But you don't have to clean up all your bad karma from the past. Is it all clear enough? This is the karma and forgiveness. So I think you see that actually the two concepts are very close to each other, right? The idea of forgiveness and the idea of karma are very similar.
Thank you, Venerable, for the talk. Do we have any questions? I think we can have 2 questions before we close for the day.
We get a lot of blessings that we kind of don't deserve. And I was seeing this today with, I walked up to Newton this morning, took an hour and a half, get my 10,000 steps in for the day. And as I was walking up there was a man, older man, in front of me, and he was walking slower than I was, right? So what was happening is I overtook him, and I get well ahead of him, and then I get to the traffic lights, and I press the button, and I have to wait for 5 minutes, and just as the traffic lights then are changing, he catches up. And this happened like 3 or 4 times, and I started to get really annoyed, like, I'm putting in all the work here. And then I said to him, look, you have to go, now you're the one who has to race up first. And he's like, I said, you're scooping up all my merit and you're not even grateful. Yeah. So, yes, the question was.
Okay. Yeah, referring to karma, what Bhante is saying maybe is related to the law of karma. This is just the word. So my question is, thinking of the law of karma, do you think it's also something related to law of nature? Like, for example, here, if I have something, whether you believe or not, whether you pray, if I let go, it will drop, because law of nature. Yes. So can you relate to that one, your explanation?
Yeah, this is one of the other talks on karma. And the way it was presented generally within the Buddhist context was the things that you have done, good or bad, will affect your rebirth. So whether you float upwards or downwards. And this will go according to a law of nature. So that was the way that the Buddha demonstrated it. And in the talk about that, I will talk about heavens and hells and rebirth and how that system works. But generally speaking, when we talked about karma, that was what would be mentioned, is that this is a straightforward law, that even gods, when gods pass away, even gods are subject to this same kind of law of rebirth. Yeah, so it's a law of nature. Yeah. What I want to emphasize in this talk, which is the end of karma, is that we don't have to worry too much about cleaning up karma or fiddling with karma, because what we want to do is get out of that system and find the original nature. And that's already yours. That's like the $20 million in a bank account. So.
If you allow me, I go further.
Okay.
So, if you understand that, whether you believe or not, yeah? I'm looking from the scientific point of view.
Yes.
So what happened then? When we pray or we chanting, how does this pray or chanting work, if you can explain through a scientific point of view?
From a scientific point of view, when you pray or chant, you are setting up a habit in the mind. And there are some habits that tend towards kind of purity, and there are some habits that tend towards greed, hatred, and delusion. Yeah. But that's not necessarily karma. Karma is only one of the laws that is happening. There's the laws of the mind, of the citta, and then there's blind chants and all kinds of different things. Yeah. I like this idea of habit, because that's chanting and praying and things is a habit that you make. Whether it actually affects other people, I'm not sure. Sometimes I phone people up and ask them, like just now I was doing my metta meditation and I thought of you, did you feel anything? I've had some interesting experiences with that, but I'm not going to tell you. So whether it actually affects the outside world is one question, but certainly it affects our kind of psychology. Yeah. And this is one of the things that the Buddha said was, even though that enlightenment is already there, it's already yours, and you don't have to pay the full fee for it, it's your inheritance. Nonetheless, the things that you do matter, and there are some things that lie closer to it. There are some things that will point towards it, and there are some things that don't. And that's why we kind of have moral teachings. That's why we have practices that we do. Yeah. Greed, hatred, and delusion are things that take you away from it. Yeah. They continually get you caught up with experience.
Bante, I have a question. So I think the conclusion is that we should not worry too much about karma. But then again, if we should
depends on your karma, what you're doing.
As in, we try not to overanalyze the effect of karma. But if you think of it, karma is something like a Buddhist copyright. If we don't talk about karma, then it's not fun anymore. So, of course, sometimes I feel that we overgeneralize that what happens is because of our karma. In a way, it's true. In a way, it's also not true. Why is it true? I believe because things that happen, there may be a lot of factors contributing to what happens. There may be 0.001% is due to our karma. But then again, how can I say that it's not because of karma? I'm here because I have an intention to come to Buddhist fellowship. So I guess by coming here with intention to listen to Dharma talk, I have done something that will have a karma effect. So is it a karma or is it not karma? As in, sometimes I'm just confused because people tend to blame karma for everything. I'm in the state of bad karma, yes.
Yes.
And
they don't blame karma when it's good. It's like, well, I deserve it.
Yeah, I just think that, are we being too pessimistic when we blame everything due to karma?
Okay, my advice is, and again, this is in a separate talk on karma, but not to try to analyze what happens according to what's gone on in the past. I don't think that was the teaching. Every time you see karma mentioned in Buddhism, it's what you are doing now affects your future. And this is a different philosophy. This means you have free will and you can steer your ship. What direction are you steering your ship? That's your current choice. And that's the karma that we're interested in. As for what happened in the past and affecting me now, and my car got washed in the car park for no reason, is that because of my karma, my luck? You can't analyze that. It's not going to do you any good to try to figure it out. What percentage, I like the way you put a precise numerical value on the percentage of karma. That's very Singaporean to do that. I'm not sure we can really put a numerical value on things. But yeah, I don't think it's worth spending too much time worrying about it. Good stuff is going to happen to you. Bad stuff is going to happen to you. The question is, where are you steering your ship? You are the captain of your soul, right? Out of the night that covers me, black as pitch from pole to pole, I praise whatever gods may be for my unconquerable soul. What's the next verse? Anyway, I have not. The last verse is, I am the captain of my soul. So the poem was Invictus, and he's saying, I've done good things and I've done bad things, but the one thing that I can say is I was the one steering my ship. It's a really powerful poem. Yes. You need a microphone.
I was thinking of atta. And atta is always associated or has been translated as soul. But the Buddha teaches us there is no such thing. It is anatta. So I'd like to hear your view on the differentiation between these concepts.
Yeah. Might have to postpone lunch a bit, but we can go into that. Right, this is one of the criticisms of Mahayana Buddhism when they introduce this idea of Buddha nature. And kind of Theravada says, hang on, you're introducing an atta, which we didn't have. The Buddha didn't call it the Atman or the Atta, although personally I think that's a fairly, within the Hindu context, I think that's what they're talking about. He used words like amata, deathless, or asangata, which is unconditioned, these kinds of words. So he was using these words in a positive identification of this thing. But he didn't call it the self, the atta. Yeah. Okay? I think that was clear enough, huh? You kind of stopped to look at me. There is a question. I got into trouble for this in Singapore some years ago. There are certain scholars, and I'm not going to say whether I agree with them or not, because that's what I got into trouble for, who point out that the Buddha didn't say there is no atta. The Buddha said the eye is not atta, the ear is not atta, the nose is not atta. So anatta is an adjective to describe each of your senses. That's very different to saying there is no atta as a philosophical statement, which would be nattata, there is no atta. No, he said your eye is not your atta, your ear is not your atta. So some scholars say that opens the door. Well, maybe there is an attar, or maybe there's something else that we shouldn't really call it attar or non-attar. I would say use the terms that the Buddha used, like amata, the deathless, asangata, unconditioned. There's plenty of terms there to use. We don't need to start changing the definitions of the words. But suffice to say, there are different views on this topic. Mostly the forest monks in Thailand they often use the word citta. So the citta is the consciousness, they say, is yours, is real, is permanent, and it doesn't change. If you go to the suttas, however, you find that many different definitions of citta, so it becomes an academic issue. It's a good topic to do in a class, and we can get the whiteboard out and we can start drawing the boxes and the definitions and clarifying it that way. So I'd be very happy to do that next year, but yeah.
Let's put ourselves in Anjali and
Over at the back,
pay
yeah.
through one more.
So to achieve the deathless, you can base on the understanding and realization rather than depend on karma, isn't it? Is you saying?
Yes, correct. Karma is all that affects experience and that whole world of experience and samsara. But the deathless is there, it's always there, it's yours.
So is that karma is like more on the skillful mean to relate to the precept, sila? So
Yeah. Because within that world of experience and things that you can do and not do, there are some things that will take you in the right direction and some things that will take you into more attachment, more greed, more hatred, more delusion.
Okay, can you just comment about the sudden enlightenment, satori, and the gradual development? And do you believe both, or it depends on the personality?
Yeah, actually, we're doing a sutta class on that this week. One of the days, it's either Tuesday or Saturday. I can't remember which day it was. I'm doing 2 classes, and it was a story. So I'll be presenting the Platform Sutra, which is a key Zen sutra. I don't want to say Mahayana because I consider that more Tibetan, but it's a key Zen sutra on sudden enlightenment or gradual enlightenment. And this is a big question that arose within Buddhism, whether enlightenment happens in a flash or whether it happens gradually. And so it's a very interesting topic. I'm happy with both. There's actually, if you're interested, I can give you, there's a conference some years ago on this topic, and good scholars came and presented papers. And they examined the topic much more depth than I ever did. I was quite impressed with the papers. But one of them was pointing out that it's not just sudden or gradual. With Satori, he mentioned Satori, which is a Zen form of enlightenment. But usually Satori is like a flash of enlightenment, but you're not an arahant. You still have work to do. And in Theravada, that was called Jeda Vimutti Jnana Dasana, which means insight into the liberation of the heart. But the papers point out that because of this, with Satori, sometimes it's sudden enlightenment followed by a gradual path. There are other times you have a gradual path finalized by a sudden enlightenment. There are other times that there's gradual and it's always gradual and you ease your way into enlightenment. I like that idea myself. So there are various connotations of it, right?
Okay, we really have to let Venerable go for his lunch. There are some consultant sessions this week, so I'll make the announcements later. Let's put ourselves in Anjali and pay through respects to the Venerable first.
Thank you for having me here, and I'll be here next week, next Saturday, Sunday, and then this Tuesday evening, Wednesday. So they really stacked it up, when I...
Yes. Okay, let's invite the Venerable